and then you'll see Kyren Lacy come to a stop.
New surveillance footage have emerged that proves Kyren Lacy innocent. What police claimed happened that December night doesn't match the evidence at all.
That lady in the back of me, she didn't saw what's happening. That's how she called that record sheet.
And once you see what his attorney Matt Ory discovered next, you'll understand why this case was never meant to see the light of day. The evidence that changes everything. On December 17, 2024, a fatal crash occurred on Louisiana Highway 20 near Lockport that would ultimately destroy the life of a young man with everything ahead of him. The official story painted by Louisiana State Police was straightforward and damning. Kyren Lacy, the former LSU wide receiver who had just declared for the NFL draft, was allegedly driving his green Dodge Charger at reckless speeds, weaving through traffic in a no-passing zone. According to their investigation, his aggressive driving forced a vehicle driven by a woman in a Kia Cadenza to swerve left into oncoming traffic, causing a head-on collision with 78-year-old Herman Hall's vehicle. Hall died instantly from the impact. Lacy, they said, fled the scene without rendering aid or calling for help. The charges came down hard and fast. Negligent homicide, felony hit and run, reckless operation of a vehicle. These weren't minor infractions. These were serious felonies that could put someone away for decades. Lacy was arrested on January 15, 2025, and posted $150,000 bail. But the damage was already done. The media coverage was relentless. Social media exploded with condemnation. A young man who had spent his entire life working toward his dream of playing in the NFL watched that dream disintegrate in real time. The NFL revoked his invitation to the scouting combine. Teams that had been interested suddenly went silent. His name, which should have been called on draft day, became synonymous with tragedy and recklessness. But here's what nobody knew at the time. The entire narrative was built on a foundation that was crumbling before it was even fully constructed. And the person who knew that better than anyone was Kyren Lacy's attorney, Matt Ory, who maintained from day one that his client was innocent. On October 3rd, 2025, 6 months after Lacy's death, Ory sat down for a 44-minute interview with HTV10, a local Louisiana television station, and released evidence that should have been examined thoroughly before any charges were ever filed. What he showed wasn't just a different angle or a minor discrepancy. It was proof that the entire sequence of events, as described by law enforcement, was fundamentally wrong. The centerpiece of this new evidence is surveillance footage from a nearby business that captured the entire crash sequence in real time. And what it shows is absolutely crucial to understanding what actually happened that night.
Yeah, so what you'll see is in the top left of the screen, you're going to see multiple cars just making their way south to Thibodaux, coming from Vacherie. At some point in time, you're going to see the collision, which we're going to know is vehicle number 2 from oncoming traffic colliding with the vehicle of Mr. Hall.
Let that sink in for a moment. The video shows the collision happening first, not Lacy causing it, not Lacy weaving through traffic at the moment of impact. The collision happens, and then Lacy's vehicle arrives afterwards.
You will see another vehicle come to a stop, and then you'll see Kyren Lacy come to a stop.
So as we've seen the video, it looks like the impact happens, and then Kyren Lacy is behind him. How far away was he from there?
This isn't a matter of interpretation or competing theories. This is time-stamped video evidence showing the actual sequence of events. Lacy arrives at the scene after the fact, not causing the crash, not weaving through traffic at the moment of impact, arriving at the scene after the collision had already occurred. But Ory didn't stop there. He had the data to back up exactly where Lacy's vehicle was at the critical moment.
Well, yeah, that's the beauty of the investigative report that I now have my hands on. We know from data that Kyren Lacy did in fact pass 4 cars. There's no disputing that. Further north, Kyren Lacy passed 4 cars.
So yes, Lacy had passed vehicles earlier in his journey. That part was true, but here's what matters most about where he was when the crash actually happened.
However, he was back in his lane of travel, 92.3 yards. Back in his lane, behind Mr. Hall. At the time of impact, he's 72.6 yards behind the vehicles at the time of impact. Keyword, behind the vehicles.
Let's break down what this means in practical terms. Lacy had passed 4 vehicles earlier in his journey. Yes, that part was true. But by the time the fatal collision occurred, he had returned to his proper lane 92.3 yards before reaching Hall's vehicle. That's roughly 277 feet. For context, that's nearly the length of a football field. And at the exact moment of impact, when the Kia Cadenza collided with Herman Hall's vehicle, Lacy was 72.6 yards behind them. That's 218 feet. That's not close. That's not approaching the scene. That's so far back that there's no physical way his driving could have caused the evasive action that led to the crash.
That is not how this story was ever painted. Never.
Any part of the district attorney's investigation that talked about Mr. Lacy getting back, I guess we'd call it, what do you call it, correcting or getting in your proper lane?
The official narrative never mentioned that Lacy was back in his proper lane. It never mentioned that he was nearly 100 yards behind the collision point. It painted a picture of aggressive, reckless driving that directly caused the crash, but that picture was false.
Sure, he was back in his proper lane according to their data. This isn't my expert. This is the investigation of the Lafourche Parish District Attorney's Office.
And this is the most damning part. This wasn't some defense expert brought in to massage the numbers or create an alternative theory. This was the district attorney's own investigation using their own data and their own experts, showing that Lacy was back in his lane and nowhere near the collision point when it happened.
So I'm here simply comparing and contrasting the district attorney's office with state police in this matter, their investigations. And in that investigation,
think about what that means. The district attorney's own investigation, using their own data and their own experts, showed that Lacy was back in his lane and nowhere near the collision point when it happened. Yet somehow, the Louisiana State Police built an entire case around the theory that his reckless driving caused this crash. How does that happen? How does evidence that clearly exonerates someone get ignored while charges are filed anyway? The surveillance video also reveals another critical detail that was either missed or ignored in the initial investigation. The footage shows that the actual sequence of the crash involved the Kia Cadenza swerving to avoid something, but that something wasn't Lacy's vehicle. There was another vehicle in the equation, a gold pickup truck, and that truck appears to have been the catalyst for the evasive maneuver that led to the fatal collision. The woman driving the Kia Cadenza was responding to the gold truck ahead of her, not to Lacy's Charger behind her. This completely dismantles the prosecution's theory of the case. If Lacy was 72.6 yards behind the vehicles at the time of impact, and if the surveillance footage shows the crash happening before he even arrived at that section of roadway, then there's no causal connection between his driving and Herman Hall's death. You can't cause something that happens before you get there. It's physically impossible. But Ori had more evidence to present. He had obtained body camera footage from the Louisiana State Police officers who responded to the scene that night. And what that footage reveals is even more disturbing than the misidentification of Lacy's location during the crash. It shows what appears to be active coaching of a witness to provide testimony that would implicate Lacy, even when that witness's initial account told a completely different story. And that witness was the driver of the gold pickup truck, the same vehicle that may have actually triggered the fatal sequence of events. How a witness was coached. The body camera footage that Matt Ori released shows something that should trouble anyone who believes in the integrity of criminal investigations. It shows a Louisiana State Police trooper interacting with the driver of the gold pickup truck, asking him to write a statement about what he witnessed. But this wasn't a neutral request for information. This was an active attempt to shape the narrative in a very specific direction, and the footage captures it all.
So, look, don't worry about filling any of this top information, like your name, your address. Don't worry about any of that. Just right here, if you could, I'll just have you write exactly what you saw. Just make sure to include, where you were.
I don't even know what the name of that highway is.
It's Highway 20.
That seems innocent enough on the surface. An officer helping a witness fill out paperwork at a chaotic accident scene. Standard procedure, right? But watch what happens next. The tone shifts. The instructions become very specific. And suddenly, this isn't about writing down what the witness saw. It's about writing down what the officer needs him to have seen.
Just make sure you add in there that you had to slam on your brakes, and the brakes, you had to slam on the brakes to avoid that charger, and the brakes locked up to avoid that charger.
Read that again. The officer isn't asking the witness what happened. He's telling the witness what to write. He's specifically instructing him to say that he had to slam on his brakes to avoid the charger, that the brakes locked up to avoid the charger. This is the green Dodge Charger, Lacy's vehicle. The officer is feeding the witness the exact language that will support the theory that Lacy caused this crash. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Listen to how the witness responds.
I ain't skid mark or nothing, but I wasn't even gone, man. That lady in the back of me, she didn't know what happened. That's how she called that wreck. She was running in the back of me, and she pulled on the other side. And that's not in it.
The witness is pushing back. He's saying he wasn't even going fast. He's saying the lady behind him, the woman in the Kia Cadenza, didn't know what was happening. He's saying she caused the wreck. He's telling the officer a completely different version of events than what the officer is trying to get him to write down. But the officer doesn't accept that. He keeps redirecting the witness back to the narrative he wants.
So, but the charger was coming right at you, correct? And that's why you had to slam on your brake, the head on with you. So yeah, just make sure you include that, and that's very important because we're trying to locate this charger right now. So just include that in the statement.
The officer isn't accepting the witness's version. He's He's saying, but the charger was coming right at you, correct? He's putting words in the witness's mouth, and then he emphasizes why this is so important, because we're trying to locate this charger right now. They already have a theory. They already have a suspect in mind, and they need this witness's statement to support that theory. In his interview with HTV10, Ori breaks down exactly what's happening in this exchange.
In that video, you can clearly hear the suggestive nature indicating that I need you to say that you had to slam on your brakes and you had to avoid a charger.
Okay, just make sure you add in there that you had to slam on your brakes, and the brakes, like, you know, you had to slam on the brakes to avoid that charger, and the brakes locked up to avoid that charger.
But Ori doesn't stop there. He points out what the witness actually said when he was allowed to speak for himself.
But then you hear Gold Truck, the witness who's the Gold Truck, what he says. And he says verbatim,
I ain't skid mark or nothing. I wasn't even going for it. That lady in the back of me, she didn't saw what's happening. That's how she called that wreckage. She was running in the back of me. She pulled on the other side. And that's not in it.
I didn't skid marked or nothing because I wasn't even going that fast. That lady in the back of me, she didn't see what's happening.
The witness is saying he didn't leave skid marks because he wasn't going fast. He's saying the woman behind him didn't see what was happening and she caused the wreck. This is the complete opposite of what the officer is trying to get him to write. And the evidence backs up what the witness initially said.
That's how she caused that wreck. She was gonna run into the back of me and she pulled into the other side. But there's a bigger problem.
The witness is explicitly saying that the woman in the Kia Cadenza caused the wreck. She was about to run into the back of him and she swerved into the other lane to avoid him. This completely contradicts the narrative that Lacy's reckless driving forced her to swerve. And then Ori reveals the bigger problem.
I then obtained the actual written statement.
And this is from the Gold Truck.
This is the Gold Truck. Now, after the statement we just went through, notice, I've obviously redacted names, addresses, and the cell phone number. In fairness to the individual who is Gold Truck, number one, in oncoming traffic.
So Ori has the actual written statement that ended up in the official police file. And what he's about to show is how dramatically different it is from what the witness actually said on camera.
See, the problem with that statement is, it is in direct contravention to what was said minutes earlier. It's not written by him, and where it says signed, it's not signed, it's refused.
The written statement that ended up in the official police file doesn't match what the witness said on camera. It's not in the witness's handwriting, and where there should be a signature, it says refused. The witness refused to sign a statement that didn't reflect what he actually saw, but that statement still made it into the file, and more importantly, it made it into the arrest warrant affidavit. Now watch as Ori connects the dots between what the witness actually said and what the physical evidence shows.
But you see, when I have a witness who is the most critical, and he's telling you, I wasn't traveling fast. We know now that he wasn't. The data shows 2.99 seconds before that he was traveling 28 miles an hour. The data shows that. Now he corroborates that.
The data from the crash reconstruction shows that the Gold Truck was traveling at 28 miles per hour, just 2.99 seconds before the impact. That's not speeding. That's not aggressive driving. That's barely above a crawl. So we have video evidence showing what the witness originally said. We have data evidence confirming that what the witness originally said was accurate. And we have an officer on body camera actively coaching that witness to say something different, something that would implicate Kyren Lacy.
And he goes on to say, I didn't even make a skid mark. That woman behind me, she caused that accident. And you give me this statement that is refused? I got a problem. I got a problem with that. A big one.
The witness is saying the woman caused the accident, but the statement that made it into the file blamed Lacy, and the witness refused to sign it.
What he's saying is she had to avoid hitting him. He specifically stated she caused that accident. But I've got an affidavit for arrest warrant right here. Nowhere in here does it say anything that you guys just saw on body cam.
The arrest warrant affidavit doesn't include any of the witness's actual statements. None of what he said about not going fast. None of what he said about the woman causing the accident. None of it.
To the contrary, about that vehicle, it says the Gold Truck took evasive action by emergency braking and driving off the roadway to avoid a head-on crash. But you just heard he said, I wasn't even going fast. I didn't even skid mark.
The arrest warrant says the gold truck took evasive action through emergency braking, but the witness said he wasn't even going fast and didn't leave skid mark. The data confirms he was going 28 miles per hour. The body camera footage captures him saying the woman behind him caused the accident. None of that made it into the official narrative.
So what emergency braking are we referring to here? And what the hell was the point of this report? That is complete opposite. I would expect that you'll show this to where they can read what was said versus what was written just minutes earlier.
The report that was submitted to justify the charges is the complete opposite of what the evidence actually showed. Ori is making the point that anyone who watches this footage and reads the official report will see the stark contradiction. And then comes maybe the most troubling detail.
Okay.
By the way, the body cam wasn't on for this statement. It was turned off before obtaining this statement. And this is what we get back in a file.
After coaching the witness on camera about what to write, the officer turned off his body camera before the witness actually completed the written statement. Whatever happened in those unrecorded moments, whatever additional coaching or persuasion took place, we'll never know. But what we do know is that a statement that the witness refused to sign somehow ended up supporting charges against Kyren Lacy. This wasn't the only investigative failure in this case. The surveillance footage shows a passenger in Lacy's vehicle who exited the car at the crash scene. That passenger was a potential eyewitness to everything that happened. They could have corroborated Lacy's account. They could have explained what they saw from inside the vehicle. But according to Ori, Louisiana State Police never interviewed that passenger. A key witness to the entire sequence of events captured on video exiting Lacy's vehicle, and investigators never bothered to get their statement. Why not? Why would you skip interviewing someone who was literally in the car with the person you're accusing of causing a fatal crash? The only logical explanation is that investigators had already decided what happened, and they weren't interested in evidence that might contradict that conclusion. This pattern of ignoring exculpatory evidence and emphasizing anything that supported the predetermined theory runs throughout this case. And the consequences of that approach were catastrophic, not just for the integrity of the investigation, but for a young man whose entire life was about to fall apart. The weight that broke him. The charges against Kyren Lacy were filed in January 2025. A grand jury hearing was scheduled for April 14, 2025. Lacy never made it to that hearing. On April 12, 2025, 2 days before he was supposed to appear before the grand jury, Kyren Lacy died by suicide in Houston, Texas. He was 24 years old. The circumstances of that night have been the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation, but Matt Ori addressed them directly in his interview with HTV10, and what he revealed paints a picture of a young man who had reached a breaking point under the weight of accusations he knew were false, facing a legal system that seemed determined to destroy him regardless of the truth. Ori is visibly emotional discussing this part of the story. The Houston incident where Lacy died upset him even more than the flawed investigation that led to the charges, because what happened in Houston wasn't what many media outlets reported.
Let me just say this. Kyren Lacy went to Houston that Friday with his mind made. He was suffering. There was a point in time that night at his apartment. The apartment that he, his little brother, and his cousin were in. His mind was made. He wanted the keys to that vehicle to, I don't know how to say this, to
Take his life.
Lacy was at his apartment with his younger brother and cousin. He had made a decision. He was suffering under the weight of everything that had happened, and he wanted his car keys. His family knew what that meant.
Yeah. So, it's either you give me my keys and I do this on my own accord, or this is going to go down right here, right now. Obviously, the keys were given. A welfare call was made. Keyword, welfare. Welfare check. Right? There was no crime. There's none of that, man. No drugs, none of that BS. Kid's mind was made.
They were faced with an impossible choice. Watch him hurt himself right there or give him the keys and hope they could get help to him in time. They called 911 requesting a welfare check. This wasn't a criminal matter. There were no drugs involved, no violence beyond what happened next. This was a young man in crisis, and his family was trying to get him help. Lacy fired a shot into the ground to show his family how serious he was about his intentions. It wasn't an act of violence toward anyone else. It was a desperate attempt to make them understand the depth of his pain and his determination.
So he wanted their attention.
He wanted his keys.
Yeah.
And they knew not to give him his keys. They knew what was going to happen. But what are you going to do? You gonna watch it go down, or you gonna give him his keys?
Right.
His mind was made.
His family knew what would happen if they gave him the keys, but they also knew what would happen if they didn't. There was no good choice, only impossible ones. By the time officers arrived, Lacy had already left in his vehicle. What followed was a brief police pursuit that ended when Lacy crashed his car. He had already suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He was pronounced dead at the scene. And then Ori says something that cuts to the heart of what really killed Kyren Lacy.
Social media killed him. Killed him. All those tough guys behind the computer,
Yep.
same ones that would come after me when I do this interview, those guys.
A young man could not get used to it.
They're kids, man.
Social media killed him, not the crash, not the investigation alone. The relentless, brutal, anonymous attacks from people who knew nothing about the actual facts of the case, but felt entitled to destroy a young man's reputation and mental health anyway. Think about what Kyren Lacy was dealing with in those final months. He had been a rising star at LSU, coming off a breakout senior season where he caught 58 passes for 866 yards and 10 touchdowns. He had earned second-team All-SEC honors. He declared for the NFL draft with legitimate hopes of being selected. Then in one night, all of that vanished. Not because of something he actually did, but because of what people believed he did based on a flawed investigation. The media coverage was intense and almost universally negative. Headlines portrayed him as a reckless driver who killed an innocent elderly man and fled the scene. Social media was even worse. Death threats, doxing, hashtags demanding justice. People who had never met Kyren Lacy, who knew nothing about the actual evidence in the case, were calling for him to be imprisoned for life or worse. The NFL revoked his invitation to the scouting combine. Teams that had been interested in him suddenly wouldn't return calls. His agent watched his client's draft stock, which should have been rising through the pre-draft process, instead disappear entirely. Everything Lacy had worked for his entire life, all the sacrifices and dedication and thousands of hours of practice, meant nothing anymore. He wasn't an NFL prospect. He was a defendant facing decades in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And through it all, Lacy knew the truth. He knew he hadn't caused that crash. He knew he was 72.6 yards behind the collision when it happened. He knew there was surveillance footage that would prove his innocence. But that footage hadn't been released. The investigation that would clear him hadn't been completed, and the court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. Lacy's mother spoke about the toll this took on her son. She described him carrying the weight of these false accusations like a mountain on his back. She watched her son, who had always been strong and resilient, slowly break under pressure that would have crushed most people long before it finally crushed him. His father later urged parents everywhere to check on their children, to not assume that athletes are somehow immune to mental health crises just because they're physically strong and talented. The timing of Ori's decision to hold the evidence until after the trial date has been questioned by some. Why didn't he release it earlier? Could it have saved Lacy's life if the public had known the truth sooner? Ori has addressed this, explaining that he was legally restricted from publicly releasing evidence that was part of an ongoing criminal case until the trial date. Defense attorneys have ethical and legal obligations regarding evidence disclosure, but he has also expressed the anguish of wondering if there was more he could have done to alleviate his client's suffering while those restrictions were in place. What we know now, what everyone should have known before charges were ever filed, is that Kyren Lacy did not cause the crash that killed Herman Hall. The surveillance footage proves he was too far behind to have influenced the sequence of events. The district attorney's own crash reconstruction data confirms this. The body camera footage shows that the critical witness was coached to provide testimony that contradicted both his initial account and the physical evidence. The witness who could have corroborated Lacy's innocence was never interviewed. This was not a case where the evidence was ambiguous and reasonable people could disagree about guilt or innocence. This was a case where the evidence clearly pointed to innocence and charges were filed anyway. Louisiana State Police responded to Ori's revelations with a statement defending their investigation as thorough and based on all available information. But that statement rings hollow when you look at what was actually available to them. The surveillance footage existed. The data showing Lacy's position existed. The body camera footage of their own officer coaching a witness existed. All of this was available during the initial investigation. None of it made its way into the narrative that was presented to justify the charges. The public reaction to Ori's revelations has been overwhelming. Within 24 hours of the HTV10 interview airing, the story had amassed over 50 million views across social media platforms. The hashtag #JusticeForKyren trended globally with over 1.2 million posts. Athletes, celebrities, and millions of ordinary people expressed outrage at what had been done to this young man. The same platforms that had condemned him months earlier were now demanding accountability for those who destroyed his life. But Kyren Lacy isn't here to see any of it. He's not here to see his name cleared. He's not here to accept the apologies. He's not here to watch his family file the wrongful death and defamation lawsuit that Ori says is coming. Lacy's family plans to file a $50 million lawsuit against Louisiana State Police, the Terrebonne Parish District Attorney's Office, and several media outlets for malicious prosecution and character assassination. They'll likely win, but no amount of money will bring their son back. Herman Hall's family, who filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Lacy's estate seeking $5 million, have expressed regret after seeing the new evidence. A niece of Hall's was quoted saying they trusted the police account of what happened, but that the new evidence changes everything. Their grief over losing their loved one doesn't need a scapegoat, especially not an innocent one. This case raises fundamental questions about how we handle high-profile investigations, especially when young athletes are involved. The pressure to quickly close a case that generates media attention can lead to rushed judgments and confirmation bias. When investigators decide early on what they think happened, there's a dangerous tendency to interpret every piece of evidence through that lens while dismissing anything that doesn't fit. That's not how justice is supposed to work. That's how innocent people end up having their lives destroyed. Louisiana State Police has faced scrutiny before. In 2023, they were subject to a Department of Justice probe for excessive force and evidence manipulation in traffic stops. The patterns that appear in the Lacy case, the coaching of witnesses, the selective use of evidence, the rush to charge before a complete investigation, these aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of systemic problems. The media's role in this tragedy cannot be ignored either. Headlines that presented accusations as facts, coverage that lacked qualifiers about presumed innocence, stories that amplified the prosecution's theory while ignoring the defense's objections, all of this created an environment where Kyren Lacy was convicted in the court of public opinion before he ever had a chance to defend himself in an actual court. Matt Ori's final words in his HTV10 interview cut to the heart of what this case represents. He said that Kyren deserved better in life, not just in death. He deserved an investigation that actually sought the truth. He deserved charges based on evidence rather than assumptions. He deserved a media environment that practiced restraint and respected the presumption of innocence. He deserved a public willing to wait for facts before rushing to judgment. He deserved to live long enough to see his name cleared. The footage proves Kyren Lacy's innocence, but it also proves something darker about the systems and society that destroyed him anyway.